A couple of months ago, I was having a conversation about dating with my sister. Mind you, my sister is 37 years old, so our conversations about dating are very interesting. So, I asked her during the long conversation, so why are you single exactly? She is incredibly smart and super interesting. She has an excellent character and this also happens to be very beautiful. And the thing that she told me kind of inspired this talk for me. She said, well, as you grow older, the people you meet and yourself both carry so much emotional baggage that starting in a new relationship kind of seems hopeless. Well, I was really concerned at that moment because everyone carries emotional baggage. So are new beginnings even possible in new relationships, and can you even change such ingrained behavior? Well, as a science lover, I turned to biology to see if I can find a solution. And biology sent me to memory formation. So let's talk about memory. What is memory? Think about memory as a pattern of signals. So the first time you listen to a song, let's say Staying Alive by the Bee Gees, if I pronounced that correctly, what happens is specific neurons in your brain create a pattern that is absolutely unique to that memory. So you will never have the same pattern for more than one memories. That pattern is temporarily stored in your short-term memory. And short-term memory lasts up to 30 seconds. And that's why when you meet someone new, you forget their name in probably less than 30 seconds. So, before you know it, actually, every time you try to recall a memory, your brain tries to bring up that pattern. But when you've only done something once, like listen to a song once, remembering it becomes very, very hard. So what you have to do is to re-experience the event in order to strengthen that pattern. So before you know it, you'll be singing Staying Alive for the whole day. And that is because now the pattern is stored in long-term memory. So what is long-term memory? It can be categorized into three main groups. The first group is called procedural, and it's basically all the things you know how to do, like drive a car, make a pizza, whatever. The second one is semantic. And semantic long-term memory is basically all the information you know, like the fact that Spain is part of Europe. And the last one is episodic memory, long-term memory. And so episodic long-term memory is basically all the memorable events and experiences that you've had, like a birthday celebration or a car accident. So, why do we remember that one time someone made fun of us in elementary school, and not all the specific times someone said something nice about us? Why do we remember that how clearly it felt when someone rejected us, but not every time we've heard some sort of bad news? Well, the key is emotion, or even more importantly, the role of emotion in memory encoding. So, take this as an example. Let's pretend you're all in a roller coaster accident. And for the sake of science, of course. So, what happens during that very emotionally significant experience, and why do we remember it so vividly? Well, your brain at that moment creates two types of memories simultaneously. The first one is the conscious memory. And the conscious memory is basically where you were, who you were with, what you were wearing, what time it was, things like that. And the other one is the unconscious memory, which is the stimulant and the pain you felt during the accident. So, when you decide to retake that roller coaster, like a month later or a year later, what happens is, at that moment, your brain reactivates two parts, your hippocampus, where your long-term memory is stored, and the amygdala, which is basically a part of your brain that deals with the emotional significance of events. And so, the hormones you felt during the accident are re-released, which then amplifies and makes the conscious memory of the accident even stronger. Something really interesting about the amygdala is that it's particularly keyed to negative experiences. So looking at evolutionary biology, we can find similar patterns. Take rejection, for example. Rejection has been seen to stimulate physical pain. So how, you may wonder, scientists believe that this originates from the hunter-gatherer times. If a human was rejected as a mate or as part of a group, his life or her life was in physical danger. They would probably be stripped of resources and moved away from the fire, and their chances of having an offspring would probably be reduced. So, when people were put under functional MRIs, people who had just experienced rejection or heartbreak, the parts of the brain that showed unusual activity were associated with the same type of pain we feel when we break our leg or have toothache. So, moving away from biology, I know, I'm sorry if you're not a biology lover, let's look at some real-life experiences. I'm going to share with you 2 of my personal experiences. So, during another conversation with my sister, I was telling her about a behavior I noticed that I had no idea where it came from or why I was feeling that way. So I told her this. I told her when older guys approach me, I tend to feel a little bit hostile and angry on the inside. And she was like, why? Like, well, I told her, I feel as though they see me as a very young and naive girl, and that I should be very happy about their experience and their years. And she was like, well, that makes absolute sense. I was like, well, what do you mean? She told me this. Well, look, you have 2 very strong-minded parents, a brother who's 3 years older than you and is also very competitive, and me, and I'm 20 years older than you. So, you've always tried to prove that your knowledge and opinion matters, when you've always kind of been viewed as the baby of the family. Mind you, my dad used to call me baby until I was 14, so that didn't really help. And then it clicked. I was like, oh my god. It made absolute sense. I remember that I felt like people didn't take me seriously just because of my age, or at least I thought they did. And so this is a perfect example of how episodic long-term memory works. And if that doesn't really make sense, let me give you another personal example. This one has to do with dance. So since I was around 12, I started doing what is called social dancing. Social dancing, or otherwise known as partner dancing, besides training in a dance studio, also happens at what we call social events, like salsa nights, and they are oriented towards adults, but also, of course, younger people are welcome. So I started going, and at the time, my mom would come along, and I had tons of fun. And so as I grew a little bit older, let's say 15 years old, I tended to look a little bit older than my age. So when some young men approached, and they would be really nice, introduce themselves, at some point they would ask me, how old are you? And of course I would always say the truth. And there was no need to explain the look of horror in their faces. And so after like a minute or 2, they would very politely move along, which made absolute sense to me, but what didn't make sense was that I felt that there was something wrong with me, again, because of my age. And so after 3 years of kind of frequently getting the horror look, I was kind of expecting the reaction at this point. So something interesting happened this summer. I went back to Greece. And I attended more of those social dance events. And there was an instance, now I'm almost an adult, so there was an instance when this really young guy approached me, and people don't mind about my age anymore. And so he introduced himself, he was making a nice conversation, and then he said, okay, how old are you? And I was like, of course I told him. And before he could make any sort of reaction, I told him, oh yeah, like, I know I'm very young, it's okay, you know, you can go. And I know, that seems very harsh and excessive, but listen, I thought that it would make his reaction hurt less. And so, this is a perfect example of how the hormones I felt since I've been 15 every time someone's given me that look are now re-released, even though no one really cares anymore about the age thing. So I'm very sure that if every single person in this audience thinks very hard about some things they do, they might be able to originate it to behaviors of the past. So if these experiences are so deep, how can we change them? If we know how our brain physically works, how do we mess with it? Well, there are a couple of ways. The first one is called behavioral conditioning. Kind of self-explanatory, behavioral conditioning is when you actively condition your behavior. How do you do that? Let me give you another small example. I absolutely hate calling business offices to ask for help and information. I get like super nervous and nauseous, and I don't like doing it, so I avoid it. But when I absolutely have to do it, what I do is I promise myself that if I do it, I will reward myself with like an episode of a series I really like, or chocolate, or something like that. And you might tell me, well, we're not like little pets, like sit down, get a treat, roll over, get a treat. Yes, that's true, but in this case we are, because think about it. Think about it. What you do is you actively change the stimulant of your brain from something negative to something positive. And so the behavior in your brain repeats in a positive manner. And so behavioral conditioning from small behavioral patterns like that can be super helpful. But it does reveal something very interesting about memories. Memories can be false very easily. What do I mean? Every time you recall something, a memory of your past, depending on your mood, environment, and other external factors, that memory changes form and then is encoded in your brain in that new format. So what does that mean? Well, that means that most of the memories you think you have are probably not true. So some of our memories we actually distort to their point where they're 100% fake. So what does that tell us about our behaviors? Can we actually base our choices based on memories and experiences we've had? Well, good question. Not really. Memories are not that reliable. So, the hard part is not really changing your behavior, but recognizing the patterns that cause it. As learned through science, there is no such thing as letting go or getting over emotional baggage and negative experiences, but actively manipulating them to positive ones. So there is no magic trick to letting go of all of that emotional baggage. From your perspective. Thank you.